Hey everybody, welcome back to MadMaker Reptile. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to build an outdoor enclosure for my baby Sailfin dragons. They've been growing like gangbusters and they're no longer little. They're almost 2 foot long and they were in this little setup for the past 3 months and they've just instantly outgrown it. So we're going to do something nice and big for them. So the first thing I had to do was pick out a spot that was big enough. I put it right next to my dog kennel here so I can get all the way around it. And then like all my builds, I do a 3D model in SketchUp to kind of visualize the space and determine my material dimensions and all that good stuff. And then it's off to the lumberyard. The enclosure is going to be 5 feet by 5 feet by 8 feet. And constructed entirely of pressure-treated lumber. To get started, I'm going to have to remove all the grass in the area of the enclosure and dig a pretty good sized hole for the pond liner that I want to add. I want to get the pond set, the area level, and a layer of gravel down to sit between the dirt and the wood frame to prevent early rotting. Getting the pond to fit is a process of digging out dirt, fitting, seeing where it's still touching, removing dirt, and sculpting the hole slowly until it fits the way you want. A pump will pump water out of the pond and back through this waterfall to both filter and circulate the water. I also needed to add a way to get water in and out of the enclosure. These PVC pipes will set up those positions before the frame goes up. Connections can be made later. The return hose also needs to go under the enclosure frame, so I'll dig a slot for that too. So with that squared away, it's time to get some gravel down and also as well as backfill dirt between the liner and the hole. Now that I have the area prepped, it's time to get the frame started. I'm starting by measuring out and cutting 4x4 pressure treated lumber to create my parts. The size that you build your enclosure really depends on the animal you intend to keep in it. An outdoor enclosure like this would be appropriate for a lot of different species of snakes and lizards. But the main thing you want to be aware of is your climate in the area you live in and how much of the year is going to be safe for them to live. I'm starting assembly of the frame with what will become the front and back of the enclosure. I made all the connections on this frame by pre-drilling holes at an angle and screwing the parts together with 3-inch screws. The main thing you want to be trying to do here is putting your screws in locations where they're on a vertical surface and not prone to collecting water. And now that I have the front and back frames assembled, I'm gonna get the help of my lovely wife here to start setting them up. And as you can see, it's basically a process of getting the parts into position, clamping members into place or propping them up into place with everything pre-drilled and ready to go, and just screwing everything together. I should probably also mention here that this project, although I'm presenting it like a DIY project, is not for the faint of heart. This was not a simple project. It took me 4 weeks to complete it. I You could probably do it much faster, but I was fighting weather and rain and horrible heat and a full-time job, so it took me 4 weeks. But this is not a simple thing. If you don't have a lot of experience with this kind of work, then you should probably get someone to help, or perhaps even hire a contractor to help you with it. So you can see here I've got most of the frame put together, and now I'm beginning to run some 2x4s around the bottom that will both hold the plywood skirt around the bottom as well as the bottom of the mesh screen. And here I'm just cutting out some plywood for that skirting and screwing it on. And now for the door. I made the door also out of pressure treated lumber, but I'm just using 2x4s. And I'm going to use some big 4-inch screws. And here you see I'm drilling the holes a little extra deep so that I can get a little extra penetration when assembling the door frame. Here you can see I'm attaching the door to the frame. And what I've done here is just clamp the door into place with some spacers to allow for the gaps. And then I'm just screwing hinges directly onto the frame and door. Now I'm attaching the door stop. This is just a piece of 3/4 inch thick by 1.5 inch wide pressure treated material that will keep the door from swinging inside the enclosure. I ran this up both sides and across the top, but not on the bottom. That way water could run off from the bottom a little bit better. Now it's time to outfit this thing for lizards. I'm going to put in a big shelf with a hide box on it, a ramp to get up to that shelf, and a whole bunch of climbing branches. I'm using 4x pressure treated nursery poles for both the shelf and the ramp so that water can drain between them. I need a shelf up here, both for a nice big basking spot, feeding spot, as well as a place to anchor branches and place the hide box that will be large enough for both lizards. And as you can see, again, I'm screwing these on from underneath so that the screws themselves are more protected from water and rain. Here I'm just cutting some of my nursery poles with angles on the ends for the ramp. So now I'm getting into the hide box, and I'm going to also use pressure treated material for this, 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch plywood. And you need to have a hide box in an outdoor enclosure. The animals need a place to get out of sight just for security reasons, as well as get out of the weather if it were to get too rainy or in cold in the morning. And this hide box is going to be thermostatically controlled with a heat pad inside, so that there's always a place inside this enclosure where they can warm up if they need to. Once the parts are all cut, it's time to screw it all together. I want my enclosure to have 2 separate enclosures inside so that the lizards have their own room, so to speak. And so the first step is to screw on the sides and the partition in the middle. Now I'll just screw on the back and the front piece. You can see that my enclosure is going to have a sloped roof that will promote water runoff away from the enclosure. The lid will also be hinged so I can access the inside of the box. I'm going to make 2 round entrances into the hide box. They're going to be 3-inch diameter round holes that I'll mark out with a compass, drill a hole, and cut out with a jigsaw. Now it's just a matter of throwing in some extra supports and beefing up the lid so that it won't be too flimsy. I also screwed on some spacers that you'll see why I added a little bit later. You can also see here where I've made provisions for a heat mat to fit in through the back. I used some hinges that I had laying around. They probably weren't perfect for this application, but they're going to do the job fine. Here you can see why I added the spacers. This will keep the lid clear of the corner post, as well as hold it off the screen in the back so the lid can be opened all the way. Now it's just a matter of screwing it into position. So with the hide squared away, it's time to move on to the climbing branches. I got all my branches locally outside near the lake and just cleaned them up as best I could. Some with a saw like you're seeing here, just to take the bark that was still left on them off. And I cleaned them with bleach and called it good. So it was a lot of work, but it turned out great. Now it's time to put the branches in. This is just a matter of finding where they fit best, which can be easier said than done. But once you've got it figured out, you basically drill holes where you're going to screw, and I used those same 4-inch screws that I used on the door to screw them to either the shelf or the frame or the ramp or whatever I could fasten it to, or the other branches for that matter. And it's a process of just kind of supporting it as best you can at many points as you can. I decided to put down some coarser rock on top of the gravel just for that much better of drainage. I know that I'm going to be using some large rocks to cover up the plumbing and fill in behind the pond. So I'm making sure I use enough rock here to support those rocks. I also screwed on this big stumpy branch to hang out over the pond. I also decided to add some leaves, fake leaves, to the branches just to make them look a little more naturalistic, and it also adds a little more shade throughout the day. I attached them simply by drilling a hole and stuffing the stem with the leaves into the hole. And now for my least favorite part of this project, which was wrapping it in hardware cloth. I used 18 gauge galvanized 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch hardware cloth. Let me just tell you, it's a giant pain in the butt to cut this stuff. I tried a lot of different tools to cut it, and I ended up clipping it 1 wire at a time. That is a whole lot of this and a whole lot of this. This was just a lengthy process of back and forth between cutting and stapling panel by panel. I used 1.25 inch long 1/4 crown staples from a pneumatic staple gun. I decided to add another cross member across the top of the enclosure so that I could cover the large side in mesh and the smaller side with plywood to provide more shade. I used 1/2 inch thick pressure treated plywood for my top shade piece. Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering, that's Clyde and Augie, my 1.5-year-old Labradors. When I put the mesh on the door, you'll see here I've got a clamp on the top of the door holding it up because it had sagged from sitting in the rain with no additional support. So I clamped it up into position, then put the mesh on, and when I removed the clamp, the sag was gone. Now that the wire mesh was finally done, I could screw on these latches and put a handle on the door. Now to make the plumbing connections. The valve you see on the left will return water from the pump back to the pond. The one on the right will pump water through a hose under my fence and into an empty lot behind my house. As for water supply, I put a simple water splitter on a hose bib. One hose gives me a spray nozzle for cleaning purposes, and the other runs the pond directly. Easy peasy. And now on to the electrical. I want everything to be relatively water and rainproof. Where I'm going to have my thermostat, I need a waterproof box to house the connection. After screwing the box into the back of the enclosure, you can see where I've added a 90-degree elbow that feeds into the hide box. Here you can see me threading the power wire through the conduit pieces to get it up to the box where the thermostat will be. Now I'm going to screw the thermostat inside of the box and thread the probe up through the tube. Now I'm up inside the hide box, where I'm using some screws and washers to hold the heat pad down better. Here I'm cutting the plug off the end of the wire that comes off the heating pad. I'll then put the cut end through the conduit down into the waterproof box. Now I want to make all my electrical connections. I need to connect power to the thermostat, as well as put the plug end back on the heater so I can plug it into the thermostat. And then button up all the wiring. And then that's a done deal. I just screw this little pipe holder on here to fasten the conduit down, and everything's done. All waterproof, tight, and out of the elements. I managed to get my hands on a couple of great big flagstones here for free, and they're very big, so I need to break them and get them into smaller pieces that I can use to surround the pond. I make sure to go around to all the sharp broken edges with a hammer to dull them down to make it safer for the lizards. Once that was done, I could move on to the task of arranging the stones around the pond. This again is easier said than done. It's a matter of going through, finding where they fit best, supporting them so that they're not precariously balanced or anything like that, and then just moving your way around until you get it all covered. I tried to save the smaller pieces to use around the front. These will both frame the pond as well as hold the substrate back and keep it from coming into the pond. So after a bunch of painstaking trial and error, I managed to get the stones into a shape I rather like. One more branch to add. time for some substrate. I'm dumping an entire bag of Zoo Med forest floor on the remaining part of the floor of the enclosure. I'm also going to add an inch or two thick layer of forest floor inside each compartment of the hide box. To top it off, I'm adding some sphagnum moss just to make things a little bit more cozy. I've also got these little spaces between the boards on the shelf. I'm afraid that these are spots that little lizard tails can fall between and get wedged and stuck. It's an easy way for a lizard to lose his tail. So I'm going to take care of that by stuffing some sphagnum moss in there. And the enclosure is done. I've had it up for a few weeks now before I made this video. It's been an absolute pleasure to have. I love the fact that I can get inside the enclosure with them and work with them hands-on and start getting them used to me socializing them and all that. It's just been a great thing. I feel like this is more than enough space for these guys at their size. It'll probably be a year or two before they outgrow this and need anything bigger than this. I also have a pair of Chinese water dragons that are going to also share some time in this, which is fantastic. The Sailfins absolutely seem to love it. They spend a lot of time basking in the sunshine. They've had real wind and real rain and even thunder and lightning, and it's just a absolutely natural environment for them. They're using their pond, they're using the hide, every square inch of this thing. It's been a plus in every way I could think of. I gotta throw a little shout out here for Camp Kennan. Kennan has inspired this build almost 100%. When I moved to Texas, I realized that I might have climate that I could use to keep animals outside. And Kennan does all these amazing outdoor enclosures in Florida. And I have to admit, I got a ton of these ideas directly from his channel. Thank you so much for watching and staying on till the end. I know it was kind of a long video, but hopefully it was informative to everybody. Go ahead and leave me a like, subscribe, comment. Any and all of the above are appreciated. Thanks for watching, and be good to your lizards.